Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Please introduce us. We're from Group 4 and we're going to talk about the use of advancement in the philosophy of communication. This group will be contain 3 people. The first one is Devano Pramudia Sena Ridwan and Praventia Mutiara and then Rachel Archita Salwa. Okay, so this presentation will be divided into 5 parts. Text please. Okay, so the first is the background, and then the case, the problem talking, the text perspective, and conclusion and suggestion. The first one, we're going to talking about the background. So in here, we're going to understanding semiotic, the investment of philosophy and communication. The social conception of philosophy. Peirce once expressed a very controversial opinion that invites many pros and cons about philosophy that must be practiced in a scientific spirit. Peirce is very different in his track record as a philosopher. He is very different from the other philosophers who became famous champions in scientific philosophy. The great thing about Peirce is that he can beat his own work in other fields such as meteorology and experimental psychology. But the relevance of the Peirce's scientific work has been used by some commentators to take a philosophical approach. In all areas of his achievements, Kenneth L. Kettner on 1987 even stated that Peirce cannot only be seen as a secondary philosopher, but we must be able to understand him as a scientist and mathematician. There is much debate about Kettner's claims, but if we look at the Peirce's involvement in the world of science, many debates about these claims, it turns out that Kettner's claims are recognized by Peirce himself. To prove this, Peirce even described himself as a descendant of natural science. As a result of this, it can be concluded that scientific philosophy actually does not have to emphasize the perspective from every angle of life and does not try to see that perspective. In his philosophical investigation, Peirce emphasized the differences in both investigation, substantially from mathematics, which belongs to the natural science. Peirce reviews if philosophy was reduced in the disciplines of psychology, physics, and biology. The reason between the refusal is because philosophy is a scientific rule that has a characteristic that has a limit, which is called peripheral knowledge. Okay, in conclusion, we can see Peirce's writings as an acceptance of philosophical inquiry as it relates to everyday study. Peirce's writing can narrow the space in a strictly traditional perspective and reduce the potential to change philosophical views. We can find some of Peirce's writings have at least 3 basic views drawn from 3 different uses of the word science, namely A. In the classical view, science was created only for certain knowledge that still has limits and refers to the taking of certain characters, terms of demonstrative. The conclusion drawn relates to the identification of well-ordered characters, that we can see in the Peirce's age philosophies of communication. B. Science should be a science that is specific in nature, turning into a science that is general in nature, especially if that view exists between ordinary people and the scientific world. C. That is what made Peirce decided that science is a concrete thing that comes from their own activities, including proper science. This idea focuses more on a method that is carried out than on the study of the knowledge method. Okay, so this is actually the continuous from the previous slide. In here, Ransdell's opinion, he revealed that Peircean study, so Peircean study is actually the study of Peirce and his theories in the terms of the philosophy of communication, has several lessons that one can assume that it is leading in the wrong direction. Although he has tried to voice his case to the point of exaggerating, Ransdell has identified elements of Peirce's concept that are often overlooked by other commentators. Okay, so this element of the concept is a very important fact that the idea of communication expressed by Peirce inherently related to the idea of inquiry that has developed and is much more organized in the social nature of science. We can see that an important manifestation is always about cooperation and open sharing of results. True science is one which always requires criticism by qualified colleagues who are willing to devote their whole life to question of almost the same content. MS 615 10 19 and age. According to Peirce, the key to success is the willingness of scientists to devote all their discoveries to social assessment, regardless or how big or small the science is. But as long as it can be considered a public science and always willing to accept criticism and suggestion from relevant research group. So this will be bring by Devano Pramudia Sena. Please take your place. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to read about between theory and practice. Peirce is essentially trying to minimize the social sphere he identifies as theory or science, in which the theoretic investigator is allowed to engage in speculation and the formulation of hypotheses freely without being weighed down by the fundamental concern of the world of practice, a broad category that seems cover traditional morality and sentiment as well as application, technology, and social reform. However, while Peirce's opinion that to distinguish between speculative and practical opinion is the mark of the most cultivated intellect. In particular, increasing theory seems to run counter to the idea that the sole purpose of inquiry is the establishment of belief. Peirce rejects pragmatism when he states that pure science has nothing to do with belief. What Peirce put forward is the point of view of segregation. According to theory and practice, which must remain separate and should not interfere with each other. Philosophers should be free to make hypotheses that might violate existing moral norms to prove the usefulness of their activities. Consequently, it would appear that the result of Peirce's theory of practice is a purified philosophical idea. Theory is not privileged in the sense that it covers all aspects of reality. Peirce is actually an anti-theorist in this particular sense, for he does not hold the position that theory strictly provides the most adequate, at least attainable, representation of reality by humans. Humans, after all, are thinkers who rely on uncritical habits in their daily life. Peirce claimed that humans have logic, a kind of used logic, or a rudimentary theory of logic. In his early article, The Doctrine of Change, Peirce identified three sentiments, namely interest in an unrestricted community, the cognition of the possibility of this interest being supreme, and hope in the continuation of unlimited intellectual activity as indispensable requirements of logic. He adds that it is not surprising that we find social sentiments presupposed in reasoning, because logic relies on the struggle to escape doubt, ending in the formation of habits of action but beginning with emotion. The scientific method was adopted because other methods of improving trust, tenacity, defense on authority, a priori method, failed because of social approach. Although philosophers are theorists par excellence, in a sense that is their main principle, this already shows that this conception of philosophy is not completely separate from application as it allows it. At least not if its application is understood broadly enough. Ultimately, philosophy is not pursued by the benefit of such speculation or aesthetics entertainment, but with the aim of enchanting habit. So the next I'm gonna tell about it as hope. Peirce rarely stops to explain views and often seems to adopt a deliberate figure and general attitude when speaking the truth. When he goes into detail, he submits several seemingly inconsistent truth reports. At times, Peirce seems to support the direct correspondence theory of truth, for he states that truth can be understood in terms of the correspondence of a representation to its object. This is, of course, the famous view of truth presented by How to Make Our Idea Clear, in which Peirce states that an opinion destined to be finally agreed upon by all who investigate is what we mean by truth. and the object represented in this opinion is real. Consensus theory about truth and reality supposedly give meaning to terms truth and reality. In the third level of quality, to truly explain truth, we must consider what function and consequences truth, as understood, can have in scientific practice.
Okay, thank you. So, here we will try to clarify some aspects of Peirce's conception of truth and its development so that it can be applied to philosophical practice. Some of Peirce's early statements do suggest that it was this time that the state will be achieved with sufficient time and effort. That is, at the end of the investigation, philosophy and all other sciences will converge on one true representation of reality truth. However, in his writings, Peirce expresses serious doubts about the adequacy of the previous explanation, and the candidate from the previous position was replaced by a conditional candidate. Almeida has built Peirce's interpretation of the development described above the accepted view of his conception of truth. In Peirce's scholarship, there is indeed a close consensus, according to which whatever Peirce's final opinion is, it is definitely not a contrary state to be reached. That is, Peirce softens his conception of ultimate truth to the extent that is an assumption of expectation of inquiry. As a result, the philosophical meaning of truth is intrinsically linked to the capacity of truth to suppress prejudice. As we have seen, this requirement of openness to correction is indeed an important part of the Peircean mission of inquiry. Moreover, Bernstein plausibly argues that science is essentially a code of ethics, something more like a code of honor than a code of linguistics, which is an ideal form from coexistence and life. That ethics derive logically from an analysis of we which should relate to one another in a moral way. Communicative if we want to achieve the common goal of a common understanding of our subject matter. Here, I can only agree with Bernstein's interpretation. So, I'm gonna talk about the valuable foundation of semiotic intelligence. So far, I have sketched Peirce's conception of science in as general terms as possible. That is, I have identified a number of characteristics that any inquiry must be fulfilled in order to be considered scientific in the Peircean sense. However, as noted, this perspective privileges heuristic inquiry and marginalizes practical science, which Peirce defines as investigation being pursued for the sake of some anticipated utility of it to some man or men, rather than as inquiry for the sake of truth. I have argued that Peirce's demand that genuine science and philosophy in particular ought to be strictly theoretical is somewhat misleading, but this does not alter the fact that heretic inquiry is not utilitarian in a narrow sense. The first, and indisputably contentious distinguishing mark proposed by Peirce is that philosophy is a positive science, that is, an endeavor to discover what really is true. In contrast, philosophy, theoretical as it may be, is a connected experience and tangible reality. Peirce holds that simple sense experience or impressions neither in-house the field of experience nor provide a certain foundation for knowledge. Apart from the question of the etymological accuracy of this argument, the issue at hand is complicated by the fact that Peirce tends to employ the term experience in somewhat different ways. William has identified two principal uses of experience in Peirce's philosophy. In the broad application, experience is simply anything that can be said to be experienced, whether feeling, effort, resistance, thought, or something else. In the narrow sense, experience comprises the brute facts of action and reaction apart from cognition and interpretation. He notes that Peirce defined experience as the cognitive resultant of life. The theory fails to see that this definition also includes a strong emphasis on effort and reaction toward the idea that experience is a determination of cognition. The special purpose of philosophy is precisely the study of such common experience. Understood broadly, of course, the special sciences are also experiential in the sense that they deal with empirical observations and consequences. But the distinguishing characteristic of philosophy is that it turns its attention on experience in general. As it occurs in our daily life, instead of in specific slides of laboratory experience, consequently, Peirce distinguishes the influence scientific sense of experience. Philosophy, there is no spatial observational art, and there is no knowledge evidence suddenly acquired in the light of which experience is to be interpreted. The fact that interpretation is omnipresent, providing the experience of the cognitive again, constitutes a special challenge for philosophy. This also indicates wise and knowledge. The philosophical discipline that deals strictly with interpretation is of vital importance in this project. We have several times argued at some length with unity of personality using some measure illusory, that our ideas are not so entirely in the grasp of an ego-ascendancy that they are, that personally identify the persuaded individuals getting time from the unity of public opinion and rigorous intelligence, that there is a sort of identity of dynamic continuity in our intelligence. Accepting this opinion, a man is not radically devoid of the power of saying what every scientific intelligence must observe. If he has the power of saying what he observes himself. Yet, here's the proof of the Cartesian program. We set out from the assumption that knowledge holds to be built on certain conditions. We cannot begin by dropping out of our conclusions, but must start off from the belief and prejudice that we actually have. According to Peirce, positive science can only rest on experience that he has, that experience can never result in absolute certainty, exactitude, necessity, or universality. There is no reason to adopt a acceptance faith, for there is a world of difference between positive knowledge and non-knowledge.
Okay, so the second is we're going to talking about the case. So the case is actually the example of the use, advancements of philosophy in communication. Okay. Now we are going to introduction of the Peirce's theory that we have talked about before. So semiotic is a study about science that has relation with any human activities, including the aspect of the science. Science that produce will show meaning. This science will communicate with human sense. The human sense that mentioned is hearing sense, and then sight sense, and then touching sense, and feeling sense. Okay, in here, Peirce never seen a sign as one meaning. He assumed that every people has their own interpretation of the sign they knew. It's Peirce 2009. Okay, talking about the social media. Social media is a media that used for embracing every part of human civilization in every aspect of life. Now, in here we're going to talking about the social media users. Social media users in Indonesia contain 117 million active users from 270.6 million people. So this always rise every 10 million people or 6.3% from the last years. In the chart, we can see that 61.8% are the active social media users and 38.2% are not. In here, we're gonna talking about the 7 process to use advancement in philosophy of communication. Talking about the first one is communication. So in here, we embracing people border and more communities, and 2 traditional communication is included. Next is communication personality. The first one is verbal and non-verbal communication. For example, Zoom, Google Meet, and Microsoft Teams as a verbal communication, or an emoticon that used for non-verbal communication. The third is communication arrangement. First, every part of communication can use advancement. And for example, is the news or social update that uploaded to the social media is a mass communication. The example of a mass communication. Okay, next is communication purposes. There are 4 purposes in communication. The first one is to persuade people. The second, changing behavior. The third is changing the trend. And the fourth is every layer that has purposes is included communication no matter what it is. And then communication functions. It's to persuade, to inform, to educate, and to entertain. Communication technique. In communication technique, everyone that be the speakers must having abilities to make communication goes well and well understand. The last but not least is communication method. In here, we measuring and scoring every relation happen between human. Okay, so this is talking about the popularity of digital communication. After we entering 4.0 industry, we can see the popularity of digital communication by seeing active users in social media and how many Indonesians are active on social media. We've seen it before on the previous slides that 61.8% of Indonesian citizens is actually the active users of the social media. Okay, after all of the great achievement, we also find the threats. The threats that we face is actually COVID-19 pandemics. And what we have done to face the threats, the first one is using the advancements philosophy of communication. The second is keep updating due to running problems. The third is more digital than before. So the problems are non-up-to-date gadget users, less humanity because it's not interactive while we're doing it online, and last but not least is the persuaders that are not coming from its field of study. For example, someone wanted to educate anyone about public communication, but his background is not coming from public health.
Okay, I will explain about our case study. So our case study is about Peduli Lindungi. Peduli Lindungi is the function of technology to inform people to get vaccinated in this pandemic era. The public can register to pedulilindungi.id page, or you can download it at Play Store or App Store to get vaccine quotas that can be accessed in all regions in Indonesia with an internet, of course. And the next is the problem talking, and the slide is gonna represented by Rahel.
Okay, thank you. We are going to talk about problem talking, the correlation between the problem and the background. Next, please. Rule in the application are very useful in relying on community participation to share location data information with each other. Also, Peduli Lindungi application will also get notification if they are in the crowd or are in red zone. The tracing result from the Peduli Lindungi application can make it easier for the government to identify anyone who needs to get further treatment so that the spread of COVID-19 can be stopped. However, there are still many people who do not believe and are reluctant to participate in the simultaneous vaccination program in Indonesia, which is an obstacle to the performance of the application. One of the contributing factors is the number of errors and the spread of false news obtained by the public. So the next, we are going to talk about text perspective. The correlation between the case studies that we choose and the perspective of the writing that we adopt, namely semiotics. And what we observe here is the use of symbols from the Peduli Lindungi application when giving notification, which will later become an implementation or application of one of the semiotics, namely the science that studies symbols, signs, and so on as an accompaniment or a message that will later be conveyed to the wider community who use this application. So we're going to talk about conclusion and suggestion.
Okay, so this in the conclusion and suggestion. The conclusion and suggestion is going to be about the talking about the problems we've learned before. So the conclusion is an easy solution by simply stating that Peirce's semiotic is a general doctrine of science, which covers all fields within semiotics, becomes the basis of the study of semiotics, which including working science, various of which are the essential properties and fundamental varieties of the possibility of semiosis. The next is the suggestion. According to our group, philosophy has always been an important role in life. It is the same with the material we rise, namely semiotics, as part of philosophy. Semiotic as a form of symbol or signs. Therefore, it is important for us to learn parts of the forms of symbols or signs so that our knowledge increases and has a positive impact on our thinking power in analyzing the circumstances around us. Thank you. Okay, so that's all the end of this presentation. I hope everyone who watched this video can get advancements in taking philosophy of communication. We are from group 4. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I can see you all later. Bye.